Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, and welcome to a Media Matters special for Anfield Index. It was the final Arne Slot press conference of the season. It's the final game on Sunday. There'll be a trophy lift and all talk of the summer. Well, it's just going to ramp up even further. And that's what we're here to talk about, all these topics. And to put him on the spot, it's the renowned and the respected David Lynch. And I think we've got to start somewhere that probably wasn't on the docket, first of all, David, because Arne Slot, Trent Alexander-Arnold at that press conference just gone. It wasn't two-footed, but it might leave a mark, might it?
Yeah, big surprise, to be honest, because, he's been honest at times through the season, but he's generally played his cards close to his chest. But that was kind of a brutal honesty, really. And I mean, he said it all, didn't he, at this very start of the answer when he kind of said, well, he's leaving anyway. I might as well tell the story. So, and then kind of went in on Trent's attitude in pre-season and that being something that they'd spoken about. So, it's crazy, really, because it's something we've kind of long suspected as being an issue. I've gone to the hilt kind of defending him really a lot of the time and saying maybe he's just got this kind of laconic style and that's just how he is as a player. But, I know a lot of people have been kind of maybe harsher on him and said he's not got great attitude towards his defending. And I think that's crept through sometimes. But Slot is basically saying that that's something he's even seen in training, really, is that application's not at the level you would have wanted. And it's interesting because Trent has obviously decided to go elsewhere, and it's a bit of a parting shot. I mean, it's worth mentioning a lot of his other answers were like, I kind of don't want him to get booed, and he's been a big part of this.
Yeah.
But him acknowledging that was very, very interested. And I can't imagine Trent would have loved reading those quotes when they came out. And I'd heard it being discussed on the radio when I was driving back from the training ground there. So, really, really interesting. Probably one of probably the best answer he's given in press conferences in his entire Liverpool tenure. And it was very, very cutting, which I imagine will go down well with plenty of Liverpool fans, given what's transpired.
Yeah, everyone who owns a purple bin, apparently, according to the quotes. And it is important to say, because for people who haven't seen it or might misread it, misquote it, it was quite clear to say Trent can defend. He's seen him do it. He was more questioning the will rather than the skill. That's what will probably hurt more, isn't it?
That's it. That's probably more damning, isn't it? Because it's saying that you are capable of doing this. It's not a weakness in your game. You just do not want to apply yourself. And it puts some of the games and some of the performances he's put in a totally different light, doesn't it? Yeah. You think back to the Manchester United game this season, how poor he was in that. I mean, that's his poorest performance for Liverpool for me. But to do it in that game, you're thinking if it is just a case of application, what are you playing at? You think about, it didn't hurt Liverpool in the end, but him getting skinned by Doku over and over and over. If he'd just tried a little bit harder. And I guess, it makes you think back to his performance against Ronaldo in the Champions League final all those years ago when he was absolutely incredible. And you think, he clearly just wanted it in that moment. And in other moments, kind of maybe has thought himself above putting the effort in. And that style, that kind of lazy running style is not anything to do with how he is as a player. It's just a lack of application. And that's terrible, isn't it? And I mean, Liverpool fans have spent, it will add to the anger, I think, because Liverpool fans, and I'll put myself amongst them, really, have spent an awful lot of time defending him down the years. And to kind of hear it laid out like that by the manager, that sometimes there's been a lack of application there, is just extremely disappointing, really. But also, maybe we all kind of knew it in our heart of hearts. And I guess the upside for Liverpool is, yes, they're losing an awful lot of quality when he goes, and that's a problem for them to solve. But they're also losing a bit of a tactical problem and a bit of a culture problem, maybe, in someone who doesn't want to try the best every time that they take to the training pitch. And, he's probably a rare figure in that regard in that dressing room. So, maybe it makes you think there's a little bit more of an upside there for Liverpool that he's going.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind being a fly on the wall in that dressing room come Sunday. It could be interesting, or beforehand, to see if there's any chats at the AXA. But if you haven't, ladies and gents, I would 100% recommend watching that press conference. It'll be well worth your time. But fast forwarding even past the press conference, past the game and everything else, we are here to talk about some big topics. And You know, David, we're not going to be able to do one of these pods without talking about the summer transfers, something that's going to brew. And an interesting topic I want to put to you that keeps coming up: elite attackers. We've talked about these links, be it to Isak, be it to Alvarez, and there's someone else who we're going to talk about in depth as well coming up. But it does feel like Liverpool are really going for an elite attacker, as I'm phrasing it, this summer. How big a difference does that make to how we'll view the summer business if we land one?
Yeah, for me, it's number one importance, really. I think goals can always kind of change your team. They can always make you better. The number one thing that you kind of, you think back to a really good example of this is the 13-14 season. That was such an imperfect side. Problems in midfield, problems at the back, problems in goal. But it scored goals and it papered a lot of cracks. Now, Liverpool aren't in that position. They've got a very, very strong basis of the team. But if you just add a touch more goals and a touch more threat up front, I mean, that takes you from an unbelievable team, which this is, to the true elite, to maybe challenging PSG to, some of the, I think, could have been better in that game, some of the kind of finishing situations or just general threat and attack. So for me, it's number one priority, really, I would say, in getting it right. And, in terms of how exactly they're going to do that, it's fascinating, isn't it? Because, Isak looks ungettable as things stand, particularly as they look like they're going to get in the Champions League. So that's going to push his price up to a point that makes it probably unworkable. Is the way around that. And then we talked so many times about the striker market and how that looks. So, you just wonder, are they just kind of thinking about Florian Wirtz now? Just get some elite attacker in some part of the pitch just to really up that output in that area. And you trust them to make the right call on that in terms of what they end up with and how they fit into the team. But I do think, regardless of whether it's an out-and-out centre forward or it's a left winger because Diaz goes or whatever kind of happens, I think adding at least one attacker who you would say is undeniably world-class and is available frequently, for me is the number one priority, because I think it's the biggest kind of dial mover in the team that you could say, because, Darwin, Jota, Diaz has tried his best and done well this season, but I think there's just flaws in that collection of centre forwards. And if you could get someone who can consistently play that position, or the attack is constituted in a way where you've just got Salah and someone else who's a little closer to him, I just think it makes the team as better as a whole. Sorry, so for me that's number one priority, really.
And it's clear they're trying. It's clear, as you said, you've asked about Isak. That looks non-doable because of the fee, the Alvarez's, the Wirtz, which we'll talk about as well. This is almost going to sound a bit harsh because it wouldn't be their fault if it did happen. But if it is, say, like, we can't get that elite attacker because you've got to land one, first of all, as much as you're chasing them. If it is sounds harsh, but a Sesko, an Ekatike, it's not their fault, but it would feel a little bit underwhelming, maybe.
Yeah, to be honest, I'm kind of of the mindset that Liverpool, they shouldn't be doing it unless it's someone who's top class, or someone they at least believe will get there in a couple of years, and they have to have firm belief of that, because we've seen this team has won a title with a flawed Núñez in there, so maybe they could. But I just think they've got to try and, like I said, there's not big areas across the team where you can say, oh, they can make a great leap there, because this is a very, very good team. But I think the centre forward one is, or generally the front line, however they end up constituting it, that is the area you can make a big leap. So, but they've got to get it right, and that's someone coming in who is regularly available, is a world class player, and shows that week in, week out consistently. So, I think it's almost would feel like a waste of money if you go and get someone who ends up being too raw and a bit of a problem for you, because they've already got that in Núñez, and he's sitting on the bench most weeks. So I think they've got to get that right and not get a kind of, oh well, we'll go to this guy as fourth or fifth choice. It's got to be someone who actually moves the dial. Otherwise, you're struggling to really see that making a huge difference to the team as a whole, really.
Yeah, maybe we've got a bit of almost Núñez PTSD, but no one wants to be hearing the phrase project forward or something like that this summer. It is not what we want to be hearing. And what we do want to be hearing is more about Florian Wirtz. Now, as we're talking about them, you've probably noticed the way this is changing. The dial's gone a little bit from Bayern are clear favourites, Liverpool are in, but don't get your hopes up, to almost if it was a horse race. It's like just by a nose, it sounds like now, isn't it? It's just interesting the way the narrative's changing around Wirtz a little bit.
Yeah, I would say that the narrative on the Liverpool side remains the same. So it's that they think he may stay at Leverkusen or maybe go to Bayern Munich. They feel at the moment that's very much what they're projecting. But as you say, the most interesting part is that the lack of confidence now creeping in is from the Bayern side of things, and their reporters seem to be less convinced than ever. And Bayern would, the more noises generally come out of Bayern. You kind of, they're a very leaky club, really. So. And I think that is fascinating, really, that's going on. So, yeah, I think from a Liverpool perspective, gives you a little bit more confidence. And, City have pulled out of the race now, and Liverpool definitely haven't. So they're still there. As we record this podcast right now, they're still in the mix as far as we know. So, that shows you really that there's still a chance there, and that chance seemingly is growing with every passing report we get from the Bayern reporters. So, yeah. It's encouraging, it's exciting, but the one thing you have to say about this, I guess, is that you can't get in the player's head, and that's where this is all playing out at the moment. He knows what it would mean to his family to leave Germany, and whether that would be difficult, and where they would live, and whether I'm not sure if he's got a young family or anything like that. I don't know enough about the player himself, but all these aspects you've got to throw together that could be potential issues, and we don't. He's weighing those up at the moment, so. I guess it's all in the player's head, and I don't think anyone could offer you any certainty. But I would say the reports from Germany are very much more encouraging, and Liverpool haven't pulled out of the race, is my understanding. So that tells a story, I think.
Yeah, fingers crossed things develop how we want. And as I'm saying that, I mean, we've looked at his profile, we've looked at different bits with Wirtz. This is an elite attacker, isn't it? This is a person who could be almost a false nine, almost off the left, like a Coutinho style as well. Any lineup with Wirtz and Salah in it is elite attackers, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. This is it. This is the thing about, we can't get a centre forward who's world class because we can't get Isak and we can't get Alvarez or whatever. Just add some quality somewhere and let it work itself out. And the thing is about Liverpool, they're not stupid. They will. If they can get him, they're not just signing him because we want to add an elite forward. They will have a good plan for how they may, they want to use him and how he would fit in, because that's one of their kind of super strengths, really. But as you say, what you are looking at there in terms of the numbers is absolutely crazy quality, really. I mean, he just shows up well in absolutely everything you want in terms of creative stats and in terms of goal scoring stats. He's just... and he even does a bit in terms of the defensive aspects there as well. I mean, look at that. He's versus other forwards, he's making a lot of tackles, a lot of interceptions, blocks. So, I mean, wow, that's, he's 22 years of age. That's world-class quality there. So, I don't watch loads of Bundesliga, by the way. I must say that. So, I've seen bits and bobs from him. Obviously, I've watched him at Anfield this season. And I thought he was bright in that game, if not completely impactful. But everyone speaks about him, is speaking about in glowing terms, and you can just take a very basic look at the numbers there and see the quality we're talking about. So Liverpool would absolutely find a spot for that, and hopefully something good can come from that, because that Bayern are getting a little bit nervous about it. Liverpool are still there pushing hard, so fingers crossed the player decides he fancies a crack at the Premier League, and if he does, there's nowhere else for him to go other than Liverpool.
Yeah, it does feel like try not to get too carried away. But I suppose the final question on this, and people will go mad at this one because they'll say no midfielder, Wharton and all this, and I get that. But if right now someone offered you Frimpong, Kerkez, Wirtz as Liverpool's summer, would you shake hands on it?
I would, in the sense that, if that's the kind of basics that they're going to get done now, you would shake hands on it. But the reason I don't think it's going to be that is because I just think there's going to be a lot of exits, and there were just so many doubts across the squad, and they won't all go, but I think a good few will. I mean, the manager spoke about Joe Gomez, and his tone today was like, yeah, we're going to let him go, and that's been on the cards for a while. Harvey Elliott's tone has changed. We talk about Endo. I just think there's room for a lot of departure. Diaz is up in the air. And so if some of those go, you start to have to add more, and Liverpool will, because they won't want to leave gaps in the squad. So, I think it will, you could say as a starting point now, if they don't sign or sell anyone else or whatever, to add those 3 players is absolutely fine as a window, but it just won't end up being that, because they will end up selling more than that, and they will have to be replaced. So that's when you start to get to 4, 5, 6, maybe even 7. But that's why we expect a busy summer, because a lot of outgoings are expected heavily.
I did say it would go a bit crazy in the chat panel. It was a hypothetical, people. That's all it was. So we'll see what the summer brings. And I mean, you mentioned exits. Some are obviously known, some are expected. Probably the worrying one on this side is around Ibou Konate. And recent reports have got it there that from L'Équipe, we're hoping to reopen talks if that's true. It's an interesting one, because people will say, given the money, others will say, well, he's not one of our elite players. He isn't in that bracket of Virgil, Salah, obviously. And where do you kind of see it with Konate? Because I want to get into this, because I'm looking at a lot of things and I'm not seeing names to replace him. I don't like the idea of changing too much. Do you think it's one they need to bend on a little, shall we say?
Well, I mean, the talk is, isn't it, that 200 grand a week is kind of what he wants, and people might say he's not in the elite, that elite group of Salah and Virgil. Well, that's probably right, but also that's not their money that they're on. They're on like twice as much as that. Yeah. So, I think to say he's maybe half as good as Virgil van Dijk is probably unfair on him, really. So, he's better than that, isn't he? So, I think 200 grand a week. I mean, I'm going to say doesn't sound unreasonable to me, as if like I've got all this money lying about. But genuinely, in terms of football and where it's at and wages and stuff, that's not an outlandish demand. I don't think, if that's accurate, by the way, because nobody at Liverpool ever talks about contracts really, so it's very hard to get that kind of information. But that doesn't seem unreasonable to me. And there's still talks ongoing, and there's still plans to do more talks over the summer as well. And you do hope there's a chance of a resolution. It does seem like the player wants to stay as well. I do very much get that impression, but obviously he wants to stay on good terms as well, and he wants to get that pay rise, which I would say he has earned, particularly because of his availability this summer. So I would still hold out hope that there's possibility of a resolution there that is positive for everyone. So we're not quite in the situation yet where anyone should be necessarily panicking. Yeah,
fingers crossed that would be good to get this one resolved. And even trying to get in the mind somewhat of Arne Slot for heading towards number 21. And he talked about this summer, didn't he, when the players come back today, he'll be able to see is that hunger, that elite mentality, as he referred to it there. I can't imagine there's one single bit of Arne Slot wants to step into next year thinking, well, 2 of my regular back 4 aren't here anymore in Trent and Ibou. He'll want that consistency. Surely you look and go, VVD, Konate, that's my basis for everything at the back.
Yeah, absolutely. And if that's the attitude he takes, I would totally agree with him. I don't think I've seen a lot of, if Konate's not going to sign, just sell him now. I completely disagree. I'd rather see Liverpool bite the bullet on this one personally, because my priority personally, and I'm sure this will be the priority of everyone at the club really, is to not balance the books, but to win the league again next season and have as strong a team as you can. And the best way to do that is to have as much continuity as is possible. Now, you're already getting turnover at right back. We know that. It's going to be Bradley and Frimpong are going to be sharing that role next season. You're going to add a left back who will start the majority of games, I would suggest, fitness permitting. So you've 2 changes there to your back 4. And starting centre forward is very much up for grabs, isn't it? They're very much looking to move on Nunes and start someone else there regularly. So already we're talking 3 out of 11 positions. There's been a bit of turnover there. That harms your continuity. You do not want to start messing with your centre halves and having to build new partnerships there. I just think it will be stupid to do that, really. So whether this gets resolved or not, and I still lean on the positive side of it getting resolved, they shouldn't be selling Konate for me, because it would harm the chances of defending the title. And I heard, talk about, if Konate goes, they can get Howson and things like that, and he can be there. But no way. There's not many out there who will be able to replace what he does. We're talking about him not being on Van Dijk's level, but he's still streets ahead of a lot of centre halves. And I think any signing there's a big chance that you weaken the team, not just because it's a lesser quality player, but because of that lack of continuity and partnership. So I would personally, my view is that they shouldn't consider selling it all this summer, regardless of what happens.
Interesting. And I mean, you mentioned a name there. Dean Huijsen was linked with us for a while, but there was always that fear if Real Madrid came in that they would just steal it. And of course, that's what inevitably happened. But with that in mind, and even thinking that Huijsen was a young, developing centre-half, he certainly wasn't a finished product like Konate right now. Isn't Konate's hand strengthened by, when you look at the centre-back market right now, it's a bit crap, isn't it, really, for who's available, who they will cost, who you could get type of thing?
To be honest, I'm not a very good scout. I wouldn't really know, to be honest. Maybe there's no one kind of jumps to my mind who I think they definitely want to go, but also I'm just not very good at identifying those types of things. That's definitely not a strength of mine. But I think, he's got an argument to just say, look, I'm fit all the time now. Look at my numbers. Look how good I am. Compare me in the numbers to everybody else. I'm only 25. I'm going to get better, as centre halves tend to do, and I want to stay here and on fairly reasonable money, I would argue, compared to maybe other players in the league. So I just think the conditions are there for that to get sorted, and really hope that they do. Because I think he's making the argument that just pay me what I'm worth, and I think he is worth that, and so. I hope Liverpool would agree, and there's going to be a refocus on that in the summer in terms of the talks. So let's see what happens with it. But I hope a resolution, and still I would expect Liverpool to sign at centre half regardless. By the way, because I do expect Joe Gomez to go. Big question marks over Jarell Quansah as well. So there's going to be a spot opening up. So Liverpool are going to have to do something there anyway.
It's interesting, and people throwing out other names there. Yanis saying Murillo, Branthwaite. There's so many different types, shall we say, of centre halves, because Huijsen very different to Konate. I'd almost call Konate is a monster at the back, isn't he? His progression's got better, his passing's got better, but that's not really why you've got him in the back line. And those players mentioned there are a bit different as well. If the worst comes and they do decide to sell Konate because he won't renew, or maybe even for the ones that are coming in, do you think they're looking at a type? I mean, if Konate comes out, do you think it's got to be another beast, aerial monster in the air, or do you think a bit differently?
Yeah, I would think it has to be someone like that, to be honest. I think it's one of Liverpool's big strengths is that they've got those two there who basically win everything that comes into the box. And to go from that to something different would I would suggest would weaken you. And they probably need that dominance there as well, because they do end up carrying quite a lot of diminutive players. I mean, we've talked about previously kind of why it's difficult to get Elliott in the team because McAllister's there. Liverpool are not putting centre halves at fullback. They're using traditional fullbacks, so they tend to be smaller as well and not great aerially. So, what you do at centre forward role, maybe it is Wirtz and he's in the false nine, and all of a sudden you've just got this tiny team. So you need two big centre halves. And you've got to have that for me. So, I think if Konate were to suddenly go and they were to decide to sell or whatever this summer, or even that's the next summer, they have to sign someone who is aerially dominant for me to be the one, to be in there with Virgil and win headers, because there's just not enough of that in the team. And I think it's one area you could say that Liverpool can be got at. So don't make yourself any weaker there.
Is it also, bizarrely, out of all the positions we have on the pitch, for the final bit around this, it wouldn't massively surprise you if even a number went out and 2 and 3 centre halves arrived this summer, would it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, the big decision Liverpool have got on that is the turnover element of it. So, do you sell Gomez and Quansah? Maybe not. Maybe you just ask for one of them to do one more season. Probably, I would argue that would be Quansah because he's the younger. But equally, it wouldn't shock you either if both of them pushed for moves and they got them, and Liverpool said, okay, well, there's going to be turnover here, but we've got our two starters and they will start the majority of the games at the start of the season. We'll be okay. We'll get some continuity there. But then, 3 and 4 centre halves then becomes the two that come in and they can make two signings there. So it's absolutely fascinating, really, to see how that's going to play out. Very, very difficult to predict. But again, with Gomez, with Konate, there's conditions there for both to leave, and so what interest comes in, whether the bids are good enough, whether the players are happy to go, it is all massive part of that. But it's that's another one of the areas where there's kind of great uncertainty, really.
Yeah, we could really do with just nailing down that Ibu contract. It feels as important as many other things this summer, so we'll see what happens there. And the final bit, I mean, we can't talk about this summer without talking about outgoings. And we've been gardened on it, shall we say. We've talked about it. And it's interesting because I know we talk about churn a lot, but if I was to really push you on, who would you bet money is heading out of Anfield this summer? Who would you name?
So in terms of the ones I would say are kind of, in the definite category, it's as definite as you can be in any sort of aspect, I guess. Darwin Núñez will go. There's huge interest in him, a reasonable fee that Liverpool will be happy with. And he wants to go. So again, everything's there for that to happen. I would be massively surprised if he doesn't. I would put Quivine Kelleher in a similar bracket. Big interest in him. Clubs willing to pay what Liverpool want for him. He wants to go and be a first choice elsewhere. And obviously Mamardashvili's coming in, so no concerns over leaving themselves short in there. So those are the two, possibly the only two really you could say will definitely go. I mean, the ones I'd say very close to that is Tsimikas. I think he's the left back that will depart. I expect Robertson to stay. And I would also say that probably Chiesa's in there as well, actually. I think those two, they're probably creeping into the definites, really. I've seen a couple mentions of Morton and Doak, and again, I would agree with those. I'm just thinking that they're kind of fringe players. That would they will definitely go. But yeah, outside of that kind of six, it starts to get a little bit difficult. But there are then doubts because Joe Gomez, it's just about what the interest is. And if nobody's kind of worried about his injury record or whatever, that's the potential spanner in the works there. Quansah, do Liverpool let him go because they've got to manage turnover and they're a little bit worried about that? Maybe not. So we don't know. Luis Diaz, does the interest turn into anything? And again, Liverpool kind of managing turnover once they lose Chiesa and Núñez. That it starts to get into real doubts then around the rest of them, where it's kind of, Jota, again, how much turnover do you want in the forward line? It starts to get into that kind of conversation. So very, very kind of difficult to predict, really, a lot of them. But I think there are a few there that you would say are kind of in that certain bracket. In fact, I've not done the midfield. Elliott, big doubts. Endo, big doubts. They are close, and maybe one will go rather than two, but again, huge possibilities for that to happen. So it's mad, really. I've never known a summer like this, particularly as they've kind of just won the league as well. And you're saying, well, half the squad's future's up and down, but it genuinely is. So honestly, fascinated to see how this one plays out, and brilliant for us in terms of things to cover and talk about. Very different to last season. So looking forward to seeing how it all kind of shakes out, really, with that.
I mean, we mentioned so many there, and I think part of why we just are waiting for this summer, I think it's quite clear, being honest, that Arne Slot doesn't fancy a lot of these players, and it might be about whether they can get the replacements that he wants in more than anything. Is there a player that, because we named a lot there and there's a lot of question marks, is there any players you think may just, if an offer comes in, it's not expected, but actually they would consider it? Is there anyone who you think might just creep into that surprise exit category, would we say, this summer?
I wouldn't say so, really, because, I mean, you could maybe put Alisson in that bracket, but I don't get massive noises from his camp that he wants to do anything but stay at the moment. So I think I would not be shocked at all. And my kind of expectation right now as we're talking is that Alisson will probably be on the side of staying. He doesn't. You're not getting the feeling from his camp at the moment he wants to go, but he can't kind of be definitive on that. And because if the money comes in and he fancies it or whatever, everything can kind of change. But you don't get that vibe. But he's in that kind of bracket, isn't he? And I would say Diaz is maybe in that bracket as well. In that we're saying there's doubts over him, but Liverpool are going to ask a lot. They're not going to give him away, and they're not forcing him out the door by any means. He's versatile, hard worker, scored a lot of goals this season. He's important. He's in that thing of, there are doubts and there are question marks because people might want him, but they're not giving him away and they're not kicking him out. Absolutely not. So, I would say you kind of can put him in the surprise bracket in that, yes, it's been trailed for a while, but a lot has to happen for that to come off. So, maybe they're the kind of two that I would maybe put in that sort of bracket. But I mean, what would be easier? What's mad about it is to talk about the ones who are certain to stay. You can reel them off. You can say Van Dijk. I'd say Konate. I don't think they will sell him in the end. I think Szoboszlai, McAllister, obviously Salah, Jones, Gakpo, Gravenberch, and then I guess that's it really. That's the group really that will stay, and everybody outside of that group is varying degrees of out the door and potentially out the door. So incredible really, and it just makes it so interesting coming into the summer. No idea how half of that's going to pan out.
Yeah, it is interesting. I think I did want to ask you about Diaz because there's been noises around Luis Diaz for years and always about how settled he is on Merseyside. His old fella's talked about Barcelona enough. And I think that's fair to say because Deco's been talking about him. If Barcelona do put this 70 million quid on the table, this mythical lever they're going to pull, you'd probably expect that to happen though, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I think that's the thing is that Liverpool aren't stupid and they wouldn't turn that down for someone of his age. He's 2 years left on his contract. It would be sensible to accept that deal. And I think Liverpool would say that much. But that's a big if, isn't it? We heard about Barca interest in him last summer and that amounted to nothing. Where are they up to financially? Are they able to do that deal? Do they think he's worth that? It kind of seems a little mad to me, by the way, just on the basis that they've got Rafinha, Yamal already in that team. What are they kind of desperate for left winger who costs that much and is that age? It kind of surprises me that they're that bothered about it, really. But yeah, Liverpool are not stupid. They wouldn't kind of turn down crazy money for him, and they would, they'll have options lined up if that's to be the case. But it's just a big if at the moment, and that's why I kind of put him more on the side of staying. In that, I don't think Liverpool are kicking him out the door. It's just if an amount of money that gives them no choice comes, then they will probably lean towards selling. But but that's got to happen first, and whether that happens or not, I think that's very, very hard to predict.
It is tough. And I suppose the final one on this, it was more of a case of who do you think will really push and who will maybe accept the world as it is. I mean, we talked about players like Kwanzaa, Elliott, Chiesa, Endo even mentioned. Some of those are probably, you'd think, they won't like it, but maybe more affable to sitting on the bench or being a squad player possibly. It's difficult without obviously speaking to the players directly. But is there any you think maybe on the other side will be like, I need to get my career going or I want to play, so I'm off?
I think Kwanzaa's more on that side than people would maybe imagine, to be honest. I think that would kind of surprise people, but I think he is of the mindset that he would like to play more. And if a decent Premier League team comes in for him this summer, I think he would not publicly push to go and then kick up a stink or anything like that, but I think he would be having conversations that would be along the lines of, I would like to go. If if the money's right, can you let me go? I think he would very much be like that. So that again, when you put Joe Gomez in there, who Joe Gomez may be similar as well. If a decent offer comes in for him, I think he will be ready to depart. He probably was last season and did one more year and has ended up with another winners medal, which is great. But yeah, I think those two are kind of in that camp of pushing. Elliott would not be like that. I think he would reluctantly accept going. But it could happen. But it would be a reluctance from his side because he wants to stick around. And I wonder with Endo where he's kind of sitting. That's one I don't kind of have any insight on at the moment. He's an interesting one. Is he ready to go and play more? Possibly, judging from his quotes relatively recently. But we don't kind of know on that one. But yeah, There is a kind of split on attitudes, I think, in the squad. Some of the fringe players is that some would push, some maybe wouldn't. And we'll get to see that play out, that dynamic, because it will have an impact on what Liverpool do in the end as well. So that's all part of it. And again, another uncertainty to throw into the mix, along with whether a club will bid, whether it's enough, whether the player's happy with that particular move, all these things. There's so many kind of moving parts there, to be honest.
I think it's crazy to say, but it's important to reiterate, because Tuesday, we'll obviously do our last match-based media matters of the season with the final game and debrief on that. But to be honest, we're probably expecting to be getting back on this quite a bit, mainly talking about who's going in and who's going out that revolving door at the AXA, aren't we?
Yeah, it's just going to be a lot going on potentially. Basically, if you want to kind of a little bit of a prediction, I feel like it's going to be the busiest summer we can remember. Really, it's because there are so many question marks on potential outgoings. There are so many links in terms of potential incomings, and you always take those links with a pinch of salt. But I think a lot of it is already firming up to the point that Liverpool are putting themselves in a position where if X, Y, and Z leaves, along with what we're already doing is the business that we want to do, this is the business that we may be forced to do, and the business that we kind of want to do if such and such player leaves. So, I think all the talk about nobody at Liverpool is playing down busy summer, and I genuinely do believe that that's going to be the case.
It is exciting. Let's just hope it ends with an elite attacker, a certain defender stay in, and maybe we'll just see what happens from there, in all honesty, ladies and gents. But there we go. Plenty to talk about, plenty to lead up to the summer as well. All that leaves me to say as ever is, David, for the time, the insight, for the honesty and the opinions, it is much appreciated.
No, thank you for having me.
And ladies and gents, that was another Media Matters for Anfield Index.